now. Hi everyone, thanks for joining our webinar this week. We're still having people join in, so let's just give it another minute or so and we'll get started. Okay, I think we'll go ahead and get started. I'm sure more people will come in as I set up this webinar and go over some logistics. So thanks everyone for joining our this week's session of our Virtual Biodiversity Without Boundaries conference. This week we are hearing from some of our partner organizations and decision makers outside of the network, and we're going to be discussing their data needs, what are the current and emerging tools and data that they need to do their jobs and to drive management and other land use decisions. Next week, we'll have a presentation on key biodiversity areas, connecting conservation science, policy, and action. We're still working on most of the speakers on that, but Healy Hamilton, our chief scientist at NatureServe, will coordinate that session, along with Christopher Tracy from the Pennsylvania Natural Heritage Program, and C.R. Radsab-Hearn from the Canadian KBA coordinator, and Carmen Just from Ecociencia. So if you haven't already seen an announcement for that, look for one from us and don't forget to register for it. So for today's webinar, everyone, all the attendees are muted and will be for the duration of the program. We do urge you to ask questions if you have them. At the bottom of your screen, there is a button that says Q&A. You can put your questions in there and we will answer them either during the webinar or afterwards if we don't get to your question. So the way we're going to do it today, our first speaker, Darren Sleep, is going to give his presentation, and then we'll take a couple of questions, and then Jane and Bruce will give their presentation, and we will take a couple questions, and then we'll open it up to any questions that we have at the end. So with that, I'm going to introduce Darren Sleep. He's a Senior Director for Conservation Science and Strategy at the Sustainable Forestry Initiative Incorporated. And he will be speaking about From Currency to Conservation, the conservation impact of sustainable forest value chains. Darren?
Thank you, Allison. And thank you to everyone at NatureServe for inviting me to speak at this virtual Biodiversity Without Boundaries meeting. I really appreciate the opportunity. Some folks may not realize that SFI has been partnering with NatureServe on a number of projects, and I'm happy to be talking about those projects today. If I can make my screen move, we'll be all set. So SFI in the last few years, in the last 7 or 8 years actually, underwent a strategic planning effort, and at the end of about 2018 or just before 2018, we came up with our vision and our new mission statement, our vision of a world that values and benefits from sustainably managed forests. And our mission is to simply advance sustainability through forest-focused collaborations like we have with NatureServe and others. The collaboration part of this mission statement is very much focused on the fact that we have some very serious environmental issues, be they climate change or biodiversity, ocean plastics, or protecting our waters and forests. And we feel it's critical to work together across not just the forest sector, but across society to try and address some of these ongoing challenges. For those of you who may be a little less familiar with the Sustainable Forestry Initiative, although our work has been centered around our sustainable forestry standards over the last, say, 30 years or so, SFI has very much branched out into other what we call work pillars. We work in education through our, we a few years ago picked up Project Learning Tree in the US, and Project Learning Tree is now basically a program of SFI. As well as Project Learning Tree Canada. Those are both organizations that develop curriculum for K-12 students, teaching kids not what to think rather, but how to think, and connecting kids to the natural environment and the forest, and taking them in many ways as possible, taking them out of the classroom and getting them into the forest. We also work with a number of community initiatives, particularly those organizations that serve underserved communities. Be they African American land trusts in the U.S., Boy Scouts of America, Habitat for Humanity Canada, both in Habitat for Humanity rather in both Canada and the U.S. So we work with a number of organizations that help work to better our community. And finally, we have our conservation stream, which is where I hang my hat as the Senior Director of Conservation Science and Strategy. With respect to our certification, which is obviously a pretty important part of what we do, we are the single largest forest certification standard in the world. That's by area. We have roughly 370 million acres of certified land in North America. And that's under our forest management standard, but we also have 2 other standards, our fiber sourcing standard and our SFI chain of custody standard that apply right across North America. It's important to note that we're in the midst right now of our standard revision process, which we kicked off October of last year. And we expect to have that completely done, signed, sealed, and delivered in late 2021. There's all kinds of opportunities. If you go to our website, you'll see all kinds of opportunities to comment on our ongoing standard revision process. As I mentioned, SFI forest certification has been growing over the years. We now encompass a little over 370 million acres in North America. There's various reasons for this growth, but at the very basis of it, you'd have to say that SFI is well respected and recognized globally. We are recognized in approximately 140 to 150 countries around the world, and we have a strong recognition of our brand in the US in particular. The role really of sustainable forestry, be it SFI certification or any other certification body, is to provide the assurances of a well-managed forest. So the standards are applied to management on the ground to provide that assurance that the values that we care about are protected, and then those companies that are certified to SFI in particular can put that label on their various products, whether it's office supplies or bathroom tissues, or all the way to lumber and pizza boxes. So really, if you think about the supply chain, it's the producers linking down to the suppliers, linking down to the customers, the actual buyers of these products. So when you're buying your pizza from Papa John's Pizza, you can find the SFI certified sourcing logo on the bottom of the pizza box. So that provides the assurance and in turn gets access to markets and to revenues for our certified companies. That's how it works in the very simplest form. But at one point we started asking, is there some way that we can move this beyond just the supply chain, beyond the financial earnings of our organizations, and move that into conservation? Is there some way we can go from not just providing those assurances, but moving it into conservation of these values like water quality and carbon and biodiversity that we all care about? Was there some way we could engage that going forward? And thus was born the conservation pillar at SFI, where we tried to move our certified organizations away from just limiting risk to provide that assurance of well-managed forests, but instead to go on further to advance positive outcomes in these areas around biodiversity and carbon and water. The first thing that was done during a standard revision process a couple of series ago now was the incorporation of research into the SFI standard. So if you are an organization that is certified to SFI, you must be actively engaged in research. We track that through a survey at the end of every year. Companies report to us how much they're investing in research, what kind of research programs they're doing, how much funding is leveraged by other organizations. And as we've been tracking this since 1995, this program has generated $1.8 billion, that's million with a B, since 1995. That's a lot of money, and as a scientist, as a researcher, I can tell you that's very much appreciated by the research community. We've also, we know that about 70% of those investments were allocated to conservation-related initiatives, which is really important to us in terms of driving that conservation issue forward. It not only helps generate more research, but it builds a network of organizations in a variety of sectors, including research, conservation, government, academic, community, and others, that really come around the forest and start to understand the conservation value of those forests and what impact sustainable forestry has, not just on the maintaining the forest, but on conserving the forest and conserving those values we care about and helping in communities and really making a difference. So we track not just the money that goes into it and the types of research, but also who are the partners that are getting involved with this work. So you can see here that in our last version of this, it touched on over 900 unique partner organizations. And you can see this breakdown as to which organizations are involved, what types of organizations. So this allows us to take certified forest management and plug it directly into conservation. So yes, there is still that overall supply chain. There's still products being made that get purchased and the money goes into the companies, but it drives some of those dollars into conservation in a very big way. And we're very proud of this. But we then wanted to take it a step further. So we now have all of our certified organizations involved with research themselves, but how can we not only continue that loop, continue putting the certified forest management into conservation, but how can we then use that to help people better understand the role of forestry in conservation? Enter our Conservation Impact Sounding Board. Now, this was an initiative that was kicked off in 2016. This was a program to connect across the entire supply chain, from producers all the way down to customers who are buying these products, to help them better understand the role that sustainable forestry plays in right across the supply chain. So we started by putting together this Conservation Impact Sounding Board. This is an open-ended opportunity for anyone who's interested in this kind of work. We get together once or twice a year. This year it's been virtually, which has been interesting, but prior to that it's been in person, where people can discuss the role of sustainable forestry, what kind of research we want to get involved in, what kind of conservation work we want to get involved in. We have everyone from academics, public agencies, nonprofits, program participants, or what we would call certified organizations now, as well as SFI leadership. And we use this opportunity to review progress on projects and advise on what direction we should be going next. And of course, part of this transparency element is to ensure credibility of the process. So this is not us, fudging the numbers. This is actual researchers that are involved with this, doing the work, and we just basically connect them to the supply chain. If you look at this smattering, this is not by any means all of the organizations that have participated, but this is a smattering of some of the past participants in our sounding board. It's always a lively discussion. It's always it never fails to be an interesting discussion, that's for sure. And these are organizations who not just care about conservation, but they care about forestry and they care about making a difference in the world around us. So again, this investment we have in what we call conservation collaboration brings together brand owners, program participants, conservation stakeholders, and helps improve the understanding of continual improvement within our standard within forestry. These focal areas of water, biodiversity, and carbon are examples of the focal areas that this group has set for us. The first meeting of the Conservation Impact Sounding Board set these as programmatic areas that we should focus on. I happen to know about that particular process because I was actually at that first meeting, even though I wasn't with SFI at the time. So it was interesting to come on board this organization and be heavily involved with this process long after it started. So from that work, we began our conservation grants program. We started granting organizations and agencies to do work, to ask questions, and try and figure out how we can measure the conservation impact of forestry. One of the first projects that we got involved with was NatureServe. So basically our Chief Conservation Officer, Paul Trajnowski, had this question, and I believe he asked this question directly to Healy Hamilton. He said, how can we quantify biodiversity in such a way that we can relate it to sustainable forest management? So Healy and others put their heads down and came up with this process of doing this and of measuring conservation value using a number of metrics. What is not only important is the work, but I need to highlight the project partners here, because in addition to NatureServe and SFI, there was the Boreal Avian Modeling Project, which is an organization out of the University of Alberta in Canada who does a lot of massive data around point counts. ABC, the American Bird Conservancy, the National Council for Air and Stream Improvement, RMS, Hancock, J.D. Irving, and a number of organizations like this. So the first piece of this work was done primarily in the US, in these 3 pilot areas: Cedar Keys of Florida, Pensacola of Florida and Alabama, and Washington in the Northwest. So these were areas that were initially targeted to look at what metrics could be devised to measure biodiversity in such a way that it could be related as much as possible to forest management. The team put together what they called metric families. So you see these different groups. So everything from species, looking at species at risk or threatened and endangered species, looking at their habitat and their habitat requirements, looking at ecosystems, whether they're imperiled communities or ecological systems, various landscape metrics around condition and spatial pattern and connectivity, and then finally linking regional conservation goals from those areas to forest management in those places to say, okay, how many of these forest management groups, whether organizations or whatnot, how many of them are actually contributing to the regional conservation goals that apply to those spaces? So this was done, a report was put out based on this, and we thought this is really cool. And one of the things, you know, again, with SFI having 370 million acres, one of the questions we always ask is how can we scale this up? How can we take these results in these study areas and really spread them out, spreading them right across the North American footprint? Well, as you can imagine, it's tricky. One of the biggest challenges that we saw in doing so was crossing the border between Canada and the US, because for those of you who don't know, forest management is very different when you cross the border into Canada from the US. So how can we know that these same metrics will apply equally well in that situation? So we said, all right, let's try looking at this at a cross-border scale. So we had several meetings and talked about where we could do this and where we might look. And in the end, we settled on the Northeast. You can see this border region between New Brunswick and Maine. The highlighted counties in that space is where we're doing the next phase of the analysis. This has involved reaching out to all the certified organizations in that area and saying, And keep in mind, we don't generally have all the spatial shape files for those organizations. So we had to ask them. We said, look, can you give us your shape files so we can do this analysis? We learned through the pilot process in those 3 areas that when we asked our program participants for those shape files, they were willing to give them to us so we could do the analysis. And we found pretty much the same thing on this landscape. We asked for shape files. We got them for the vast majority on both sides of the border. So we're really encouraged by that. This work is ongoing, and we plan on soon testing the metrics across these borders. I would say we're at the almost done stage with folks from NatureServe doing the analysis. We also work on on other types of organizations. We've been working with the Southern Blue Ridge stakeholders, with Forest Stewardship Guild and others to explore species and forest communities that could be favorably affected by forest management. Again, Paul Tranowski sits on the leadership team for this group. Again, working with NatureServe and other participating organizations to really develop a conceptual model, develop strategies to be advanced by the SFI fiber sourcing. Now, fiber sourcing is a little different than forest management because it's not directly applied to one area. What happens is a fiber sourcing mill can go and influence landscape owners when they're buying fiber from them. So instead of saying, you must, they say, well, how about we work with you, we provide you with a forester to make sure you've got a long-term plan, and we develop it. So this is looking at how we can use SFI fiber sourcing to influence management practices in this region to make a difference. So again, this is working with NatureServe. And finally, it's funny how some of these projects will roll forward. We had a grant with the University of Georgia to look at, again, fiber sourcing and how it affected species dynamics around these mills and how it affected practices, best management practices by people on the ground. This project is a brand new project that we're going forward with, where NatureServe is more directly involved, working with the University of Georgia to look at SFI fiber sourcing and how it affects water quality and biodiversity in the southern coastal plain. So we're really looking forward to the results coming out of this project. So again, this method that we have of encouraging our certified organizations to participate in research, and then doing research on our own through our conservation impact program, the hope is that not only do we benefit conservation, but then we can take this knowledge and reapply it to our standards through our standard revision process. So this is our means of upping our game, if you will. Instead of every 5 years looking out for opportunities, what science may have been published, we're actually helping drive that research that gets done. So we know there's research out there that will apply directly to our standards, and we can improve things that's transferable, scalable, repeatable, credible as we go forward. So again, the idea is using the supply chain, using the economics of the supply chain to not only make these products that are beneficial to society, but products that are beneficial to society and the environment. So that's the long-term goal of the work that we're doing. So with that, I guess I will pass the ball back to Allison. I don't know if there may be some questions that have come up. I confess I have not been watching the chat box.
We don't have any questions in the Q&A right now, but if anyone thinks of a question for Darren, we will come back at the end. But in the interest of time, we'll just move on to our next speakers. Thank you, Darren. So next up are Jane Breckinridge, who's the director of the Euchee Butterfly Farm, and Bruce Hoagland, who is the director of the Oklahoma Natural Heritage Inventory, and they'll be giving a presentation titled Innovative Capacity Building, Creating Synergy with Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, the ONHI, and the academic community. So over to you guys.
Well, good afternoon. I think I was going to say a few words before Jane jumps in. I'll keep it short because her program's fascinating, and I'm excited for you guys to learn about it. As was mentioned, I'm coordinator for the Oklahoma Natural Heritage Inventory, which was established in 1977, so just 5 years after Georgia, the first program. And I've been associated with the program for, dare I say it, 30 years. And in Oklahoma, we have a couple of unique challenges for conservation action, one of which is that we are very much a private land state. And so we have engaged in trying to establish a rapport with various landowner organizations over the years, including the Oklahoma Texas Cattlemen's Association. But as you'll learn from Jane in more detail, Oklahoma has a lot of tribal entities, a lot of tribal governments. And over my time with the program, I've reached out to various tribal natural resources personnel. And as you'll see, just to repeat myself, there are quite a few tribes, so it's no small task. And many of them had differing goals and objectives. From my perspective as a heritage biologist, what you're about to hear from Jane is she has brought these tribal members to the table to address a mutual concern, a mutual objective, and that has to do with pollinators. And it has helped provide a place for me as coordinator to make tribal members aware of what we are and what we do, and also to exchange information. So I could spend the rest of our time praising Jane for what she has accomplished through this effort, and she's going to get all humble and roll her eyes. I saw that, Jane. But I think you'll agree with me when you see her presentation that this has been an outstanding effort that has benefited the state as a whole. So with that, Jane, would you like to take it away?
Okay, I'll see if I can make this work. Okay. And there we go. There we go. Wait, I'm back too far. Okay, sorry. There we go. So thank you, Bruce, and thank you for all the help that you have given us. So I'm Jane Breckinridge. I'm the co-director of Tribal Alliance for Pollinators with Chip Taylor from KU. I'm also the director of the Euchee Butterfly Farm, which is located on my great-grandmother's original Indian allotment land in just southeastern Tulsa County. I'm also an enrolled citizen of the Muskogee Creek Nation, which is the 4th largest federally recognized tribe in the country, in the United States. We have about roughly 87,000 members, and I'm also Euchee too. So in thinking about this and just getting ready for this presentation. Oh, and one other thing, full disclosure, I'm also on the NatureServe board. So anyway, just so I share dual perspectives on this. So I guess the question to me, the larger question is, how can we, as NatureServe, as the network, how can we engage with non-mainstream conservation entities to increase the ways our data can be used to benefit species and ecosystems at risk? So it's a core question. There are many, many different answers to that, but the one I'd like to talk about today, obviously, is what we've been doing for the last 5 or so years with it, what is now the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators, which started out with a monarch program, Tribal Environmental Action for Monarchs. We're different than a lot of other organizations for a lot of reasons. We are the only, as far as I know, we're the only native-led organization that is working on grassland habitat restoration. We are, although we do have scientific advisors, it is a tribal effort. It is, you know, organically grown. So unlike some other organizations, which we, you know, while we're grateful that people want to consider traditional ecological knowledge and some concepts like that, we actually have a different role to play. Our role is really, and our mission is to facilitate access to the best scientific information and practices for tribes and Native people, and also to serve as a conduit to make other scientific institutions and agencies and large environmental NGOs aware of the tribes as being stakeholders in these issues. So, so our story begins with a butterfly, or rather hundreds of millions of missing butterflies. And as you all know, monarch numbers have been pretty consistently going down, as have so many of our species at risk. But when those numbers hit rock bottom back in the winter of 2013, 2014, we had been working on conservation with tribes for a long time in the state. But at that point, it became clear that we needed to, have monarchs be our focus. That became even more apparent when the USDA released their map for where the priority zones were that needed to be focused on to recover that population. And there we were, Oklahoma, smack dab in the middle of the target zone. And at that time, there just wasn't much being done on monarch conservation in Oklahoma. A lot of, well-intended individuals, but, with big agencies and institutions, it takes a while. They move a little slower. So the other thing to understand about Oklahoma, which many of you probably realize, is that our habitat is very badly degraded. There has not been much effort there. We don't have large parcels of restored habitat. We destroyed most of it. A lot of it, what was left after the Dust Bowl, a lot of it got converted to fescue and Bermuda. So it's in very, very poor shape in terms of native grasslands. But we do have one thing going for us here, which is unusual in other states, is that we have 39 federally recognized tribes with territory in the state. That's no accident. We were all removed here from various places, including my own people were moved from our homelands in Alabama and Georgia with forced relocation and settled up here. The land where our farm is the original land that my great-grandmother received as a part of the settlement by which Indian Territory was dissolved to make way for the state of Oklahoma. But so all the core migratory flightway for monarchs is under, for the most part in Oklahoma, under dual control. So we knew from our work with tribes and conservation that there was a commitment to do this. Out there just working a lot on monarch conservation. In Oklahoma, it is, as Bruce said, it's a private landholder state. There's a lot of cattle ranching. There's a lot of pushback when you tell people you want to start planting milkweed back and weeds, and people aren't really so big into that. But I'd never once had a tribal leader ask me why we needed to save the monarch. The only question I ever got, and I got it repeatedly, is like, how? So how are we going to do this? And that was actually a pretty good issue to think about, because we had done smaller scale habitat restoration, but the scope of this was pretty daunting. So I fortunately had met Dr. Chip Taylor, the founder of Monarch Watch and Professor Emeritus of Ecology at KU, and so I'd met him, I don't know, in like 2014, and I got in touch with him and said we wanted to create a monarch migration trail on tribal land through Oklahoma, and would he be interested in helping with this? And he said, yes, absolutely. It's a very cool and very appropriate idea, but what's going to limit you is the capacity issue. And this was the first of many, many, many conversations about the capacity issue. As he pointed out, we didn't have the seed resources. We did not have locally sourced native seeds. We did not have people trained in this kind of work on the scale of what needed to be done. We didn't have any greenhouses that were willing to produce the plants that we needed. Anyway, the list went on and on and on. It was a very long list, but fortunately he signed on. And from that, the Tribal Environmental Action for Monarchs, or the team, was born. It was a partnership that we began in 2015. Altogether, at the beginning, the people that signed on for the initial pilot project, we had 7 tribes, Monarch Watch, and then Euchee Butterfly Farm, which is our entity. We were fortunate at the very beginning to get a small grant from the Monarch Joint Venture, and that got us going a little bit. And then a few months after that, we got a more sizable grant from National Fish and Wildlife Foundation, which has enabled, you know, the core of this project to go. We also had a lot of support from the NRCS State Tribal Liaison, from Chickasaw Nation Cultural Center, Horticultural Department, because they were already doing a lot of native plant restoration, and also the wildlife refuge staff down at Tishomingo. Really key people to get this thing going. The tribes that signed on, Chickasaw Nation, Seminole Nation, Osage Nation, Muskogee Creek Nation, my tribe, of course, Eastern Shawnee, Miami Nation, Citizen Potawatomi Nation, and then Monarch Watch and Euchee Butterfly Farm. By the numbers, the project set forth in the original NIFWIF project, 7 tribes committing 350 acres to habitat restoration, 50,000 milkweed plugs planted, native milkweed plugs, 30,000 native nectar plants produced and replanted, and then we were set out to create a native seed bank, which ended up being at 154 species out of the initial project. The most important focus of it, though, even though obviously the goal was to restore habitat, the most important goal was to build the capacity for this kind of work in Oklahoma, because it wasn't there right now. And by using the infrastructure of the tribes, we were able to do that, to leverage that, to build that capacity. We provided through the grant projects, we provided equipment, supplies, and native seeds, and a huge emphasis on train the trainer, so that people could become trained, take that information back to their own tribe, and share it to be able to spread that information. So one of the things that was kind of surprising and interesting to me as I got further into this, bringing on different tribal partners, I knew it was going to be very different. Obviously, I'm a Creek citizen myself, but beyond that, beyond the obvious differences between different history, different language, different culture with a large C, different culture with a small c, different legal structures, it's just people even just institutionally approach this thing really differently. So I assumed going into it that it would be environmental departments. Every tribe in the country has, for the most part, all the ones I work with, have modern environmental departments that are well-staffed and trained. And so I assumed that's where this effort would come out of, but that was actually not the case. That was only maybe, I think, 1 or 2 of them. We had the wildlife department. We had communities of excellence and wellness to talk about, Osage Nation, to talk about root causes of diseases affecting Osage people. And so it was part of an eco park that they were putting in. We had the wildlife department, Seminole Nation. Over half of the tribes that participated, the lead on the project was coming out of the cultural department. But probably the most poignant reason of all, as we got into this, you know, at our initial meeting, just talking about, you know, why different tribes had signed up to do this, was Assistant Chief Lewis Johnson of Seminole Nation. And just when I asked him, you know, well, so why have you all chosen to do this? He said, we Seminole people were recently almost endangered ourselves. Now that the butterflies are in trouble, it's our turn to lend a hand and to help them out. So that became a little bit of a rallying cry for a lot of people as they went into this thing. So again, we had people that had, you know, many of them had never grown a tomato before, and they were tribal historic preservation officers, all sorts of, anyway, different people. So capacity building. How do you do that? Well, with just a lot of training. And so we started out in bringing everybody up to KU. We brought representatives from all 7 of our tribal partners up to KU and did 3 very, very, very intensive days of training to kind of get people started and oriented to what we were going to be doing. We did classroom training on monarch biology and physiology and native plants. We did a lot of hands-on training at the nursery that supplies all the milkweed for that region for Monarch Watch. That's Applied Ecological Services. If you're familiar with them, I mean, they produce millions and millions of native plants every year. And Elliot Demler, who was the head of the nursery at the time, spent a couple days training people, and people got in there and got their hands dirty and learned how to transplant stratified germinated trays. And anyway, so that was a great exercise to get everybody started. But once we got back to Oklahoma, the really hard work began, which was site selection and preparation. Having very limited resources, we went with what Chip developed, a habitat island concept. So every tribe would identify 20 to 50 different parcels, small parcels, say anywhere from like 20 by 20 to 50 by 50. We would remove all the non-native vegetation and then very slowly replant with native plants and milkweeds and nectar plants grown from locally sourced seeds. And with dense plantings and trying to keep out non-native invasives over time to be able to recolonize the area with proper management. It was something he'd been working on for a number of years up in Kansas in those grasslands, and he felt like it was well suited to what we were going to be doing here. The first year, having limited capacity, we couldn't grow our own milkweed plugs, so we're using locally sourced seed from ecoregions, Bailey ecoregions 251 and 255. We had a local nursery that the Chickasaw Nation worked with down there to produce 2,500 milkweeds for each tribe. We're working with Asclepias viridis because that's the most dominant milkweed for monarch reproduction in Oklahoma, and also very, very well suited to our climate. So every tribe got 2,500 plants delivered. That's Osage Nation. They were worried about them, so they put them in their offices until it was time to plant. Not necessarily ideal, but it does show a level of commitment. The plugs that we were working with we grow them out. They're not seedlings, but if you're familiar with this concept, plugs are grown for an additional about 6 weeks in the greenhouse to allow for better root development. Our seed resources, native seed resources, are so scarce here that we couldn't use seeds. Just too many of those lost to animal predation. So we maximize our chance and the reach and effectiveness of our seed data bank by being able to grow these plugs out first. Once the seeds were grown into these plugs and delivered to the tribes, then we would have planting days, and they were just absolutely wonderful. So we would get volunteers everywhere from the littlest kids to elders. Tribal staff usually would get the day off from work to go help, but sometimes some of the tribes didn't allow them to do that, so they would actually take vacation days, some of them. All the different tribes would come in to help. We'd have people from federal agencies, state agencies, different tribes coming across tribal borders to come help people, volunteers from the tribal communities, volunteers from the towns, just youth, anyway, kind of everybody. Just a really, really wonderful events to get out there. And that's actually Chief Jeffrey Standing Bear of Osage Nation, and he was out there planting too, really showing that example of leadership to those kids. And it wasn't just a photo op, he was literally out there getting very sweaty and helping to plant. One of the neat things about this was to get the youth involved. And so, partly from an ecological perspective, but, also very much from a cultural perspective, because how we treat our lands is an assertion of our sovereignty. And for the kids to see that and understand that and get that was just absolutely amazing. And really neat, plus nice to get them outside and engaged with that, and to realize the connectivity between how we treat the land and how the animals survive. And monarchs are a great thing for that, for getting kids excited. Once the plants are installed, and we use gas-powered augers to speed that process up, then they get mulched to discourage non-native invasives and also to conserve water. The first few weeks, they have to be watered 2 to 3 times out in the field. And then by that point, their root development is sufficient to survive on their own. There's a perfect little mulched Asclepias viridis installed at one of the tribal sites. One of the neat things about it, as I said, is that really just the inter-organizational cooperation. In Oklahoma, most of the tribes have a very good relationship for the most part, but they aren't typically going across tribal borders to go literally help other people, hands-on work on each other's lands. But we saw that repeatedly. people sharing of their resources. This photo, which is actually down at Tishomingo National Wildlife Refuge, because that's within the boundaries, jurisdictional boundaries of Chickasaw Nation, and they did some of their habitat restoration down there to augment existing prairie remnants. But, you know, so we've got federal employees, we've got NGOs, we've got, you know, universities, we've got 4 different tribes there, you know, people coming together and just working side by side, hand by hand, you know, so it's pretty amazing to see that happen. Capacity building, we knew that we needed to develop our own seed bank. So at 3 sites, we put in milkweed seed production beds. That's Osage Nation, and that was kind of a conventional planting and a conventional way to do it. Chickasaw Nation, this is not the final one. This was just the site. They did it as a at their green roof at their cultural center. That's where they put in their milkweed seed production. So innovative and just all sorts of different ways that to do this sort of thing. One of the other key components of this in thinking about doing restoration was developing a seed bank, native plant seed bank for nectar plants. You know, as you all know, monarchs have a long way to fly and really need to, you know, access those nectar resources along the journey, which funnels right through Oklahoma. And much of Oklahoma is just a sea of Bermuda and fescue supporting cattle. So a lot of work to be done there. And so we had to start with wild collecting seed for the native nectar plants, the forbs, fall blooming forbs was the emphasis. And again, this was all about training. So we did classroom training. As you might see in the background on the far right, there's a video camera. Everything was videotaped to be able to be shared later with other tribal entities so that, that people could share this knowledge and try and use it repeatedly beyond the life of the grant. So we did classroom training. We did field training, learning how to do that. And, you know, learning, you know, and it's, this was one of the more complex aspects of this because you had to teach people how to do plant identification. You had to teach them how to do plant identification once the plant had senesced or was dormant or ready for seed collection. You have to sustainability protocols, a lot of stuff. But it was great. It was just a matter of just all coming out. And again, there's like 6 different tribes represented, and it's on Chickasaw land. And we've got Chip Taylor from KU, and just seeing how people come together for this. That's Seneca land up there. Again, just a seed collection training event. And once we had the tribal staff and tribal members trained in, then they trained in youth as well. And we got youth involved and working, and kind of neat to see them again, engaging and understanding the larger reasons of why we do this. You know, for us as tribal members, when we're restoring habitat, it's not a job, which is great if that is your job. Believe me, I wish more people had that as their job, but for us, this is our home. It's our forever home. And for us to be able to bring that land back to health, it's, you know, it's cultural, it's about our sovereignty, it's about a lot of things. But to see the youth really be able to connect with that in a tangible way was really lovely. Once we got all those seeds collected, came another really hard task, which was seed cleaning. Again, this just involved a lot of training. If you've ever done this by hand, particularly with these little prairie seeds, prairie plant seeds, many of them are tiny. It's oftentimes hard to tell what is a seed versus what isn't. But we got in there and we just had whatever, I don't know, probably dozens of different training sessions on how to do this, and just, again, sharing, you know, again, this photo, this is hosted by Creek Nation, but you've got a Chickasaw woman, an Osage woman, and Chip Taylor from KU. So once the seeds are cleaned, we inventory all of them. We keep track of them, obviously by ecoregion, but also by collection site, because we're trying to use those seeds to restore as close as possible back to where they came from, trying to keep that as contained as possible. So everything, clean seeds are counted, number of seeds per gram and number of grams. And then we have seed exchanges between tribes in the same ecoregion. So as every different plot of land, and and we put in literally thousands and thousands of miles going to these sites, had different challenges. But if somebody had a lot of one particular kind of plant, people were just very happy. So in general, everybody had within their ecoregion all the same thing. Everybody was very generous about sharing their seeds. And continue to be. Once we had those seeds in place, then we needed to grow out all those forbs. And so we had to teach people how to be greenhouse managers. And again, these are a lot of people who had never even grown a tomato before. But all the seeds were tracked by lot number, which, species, common name, ecoregion, collection site, as much data as possible in each one of those lots. People learned how to stratify those seeds and germinate them and grow them out. And then each tribe is as a part of the NIFWIF grant money, got one of these hoop houses. Hoop house is just an unheated greenhouse because many of these tribal sites where these structures were being placed didn't have electricity. So they were designed to be able to be used in any of those kind of locations. They were custom designed for the project with vents that could be open on the top using a cordless drill and shut as needed. The sides roll up, and so if it's very hot, you open all your flaps and you're ready to go. If it's very cold, you can shut everything back down. The greenhouses, doing that work was also a great opportunity to get youth involved, and a wonderful opportunity for them to get some different exposure to STEM skills. I mean, it's a cliched term, but it's a way of making science accessible. So, you're learning about horticulture, you're learning about botany, biology, all sorts of great stuff, basic science of how these plants and plant physiology is working. And so anyway, pretty cool to do that. And once seeds are stratified and then they got germinated, anyway, on and on. And so as a part of this, each tribe grew out 4,000 different native blooming forbs and then installed them in their lands. So we had this really great moment about a year after the first planting, May 2017. We had that elusive thing, proof of concept. This photo was taken at the Chickasaw Cultural Center where they were out inspecting the different plants that had been installed the year before, and all of them were being heavily used by monarchs. So you can actually see, I think this was some egg dumping because those resources are so limited. That's a little, you really wouldn't want to see that much density on those plants, but clearly it was needed. And we saw that at every single one of the restoration sites, the plants were all being heavily used by monarchs. So the team project went so well and so many people were interested in it, and we just didn't really have the resources to do that level of support for everybody. So out of that initial thing, we formed the Tribal Alliance for Pollinators. So now, moving beyond monarchs to moving, supporting grassland restoration for all sorts of pollinators. What is TAP? We are technical training, we are supplies, we are support. So we have hands-on workshops, conferences. Our seed bank is one of the really important things we do. And then we've got a lending library of equipment, complete everything that you need. It's going to be checked out at no cost for tribes, everything from augers, backpack sprayers, planting equipment, literally everything that they need to do this, seed collection supplies. And then we've got how-to videos, we've got webinars. Our seed bank is one of the things we're probably most proud of. We've got, I don't know, I'd have to ask Colin, our coordinator. I think it's close to 200 different species now that we've got logged in and inventoried. As you can see there again, all inventoried and sorted by ecoregion, and then they're alphabetized by species name. And then everything with the lot number goes back to the original collection site, the collection person, collection date. We just try and keep as much information as possible with that. This is something that we're planning to expand. We actually got some new funding from NIFWIF last year to expand this seed bank, including the most wonderful thing that ever happened almost in my life was we got this very wonderful seed cleaning machine, which has saved us hours and hours and hours and hours of time. So that's been a wonderful thing. And thank you, NIFWIF, for providing us with that, because it's allowed us to expand our work a lot. One of the other things that we do is we produce plants for tribes that do not yet have that capacity themselves, and we do that at no cost. So if somebody's wanting to put in milkweed or nectar plants, pollinator garden or whatever, we produce those at the farm and can provide those. A lot of training. That's an ongoing effort that we do. So we do field training of all kinds. We bring in people like Bruce Hoagland. I think this is actually somebody else from Oklahoma Oklahoma Department of Conservation, Blaine Stacy, who's talking about this one. We train people how to identify non-native invasives, how to control those, how to know which are the good plants and which aren't, how to do, do the field identification for seed collection. We take people out there in the field and literally hands-on walk them through, how do you label your bag when you're out doing your seed collection so that you know what you have later. We provide all aspects of training. We do hands-on training as well, so people can learn how to grow these seeds out. We teach them how to do stratification. All these have to go through vernalization with cold moist stratification, so we teach them how to do that. How to germinate, do germination trays, transplantation. We do a lot of classroom training too with lecture style learning. We bring in a lot of outside speakers nationally, so that with the idea, again, back to my original Venn diagram, a large part of our role is to connect these resources. And tribal people in Oklahoma, we're isolated in many ways, so how can we make sure that our people are getting the best possible practices, access to the best practices, the best data, and how do we do that? And so we serve as a nexus, hopefully, to do that. And I think we've worked with almost 50 different tribes so far. So far, so good. We do classroom training at the farm, our farm as well. We've just completed a new facility there, a long-awaited 5-year expansion at the farm. So we have conference and meeting facilities there as well. And it's centrally located for most of the tribes in Oklahoma. So we do that. And one of the other things TAP does is help people get plants installed in tribal lands. So we have 2 staff members plus me, plus a lot of volunteers. And if somebody's trying to learn how do we do this at the restoration site, we will literally go out and show you, and we'll help you dig the holes with augers and teach you how to do this installation. And it's also cultural connectedness. So this was at an open fire dinner at the farm after a conference last year, and our Sac and Fox cook and Pawnee chef there made a traditional dinner for us. And so, we had, I think 29 different other tribes there that day. And for us, it was great to even learn, what's a traditional dinner like for Sac and Fox and Pawnee people. So being able to have that connection has been wonderful. And through the process of this, I've made, just some of the best friends of my whole life, across this project. It's been a wonderful thing to just learn how to connect with people across tribal boundaries, across agency boundaries, academic boundaries, just all about connection. So for us, intertribal collaboration, there's a lot of benefits. We share and maximize resources, everything from technical knowledge, equipment, seeds, enhanced funding opportunities. Grantors are more likely to fund a project which features multiple tribes that they can claim on the little checkoff box in the R1. And we also carry more weight politically as a coalition of many nations than as individual tribes. And that's something we saw at Standing Rock, and it's something we've seen with this at our kickoff planting event for this project. It was written up in the Washington Post, Huffington Post. It was written up all over the country. That wouldn't have happened if one tribe was putting in 2,500 milkweed plants. But when you have 7 tribes in Oklahoma coming together to restore monarch habitat, somehow that had a further reach. So. So one of the other things, and Bruce mentioned this earlier about a seat at the table, and it's something that I think a lot about with this work, as I both work with the tribal communities and then work outside with other agencies and institutions, is a seat at the table. So this photo was taken at the Citizen Potawatomi Eagle Sanctuary. That's where they chose to do their habitat restoration efforts on the grounds of that facility. For Potawatomi people, the butterflies are almost as sacred as eagles because they take messages and prayers to the Creator. So in thinking about this, you know, you've got Native people, indigenous people that have been revering and protecting these creatures for millennia. And rightfully, we do deserve a seat at the table in the conversation about what happens to them, how do we protect them, what happens next. And unfortunately, in monarch conservation, particularly as this thing really was reaching an initial, you know, fervor when the numbers first crashed, people weren't talking to the tribes. They weren't talking to the tribes about this. They weren't considering them as partners. And yeah, we've earned a seat at the table, you know, for those reasons. But more importantly, man, you need us. We've got land holdings. We've got the cultural commitment. You know, this is a huge fight. There is so much work to be done, you know, to protect species at risk of all kinds. You know, just the agencies by themselves can't get it done. Not even, you know, not even just the NGOs, plus the academic institutions, plus the agencies. You know, the stakes have never been higher. The challenges have never been greater between climate change and habitat fragmentation. This is the time for everybody to pull together and you know, don't forget, we're here too. We're still here. We're not all living in teepees. We've got big modern environmental departments, and we've got the capacity now to do this work. So again, I cannot end this presentation without giving a big mado to thank our many funders who have also shared in our vision this along the way. We've been really fortunate to have a lot of support from key organizations and from the network, from, you know, people like Bruce Hoagland, who have volunteered his time to, you know, lead field identification classes, to work with us in the seed bank, to help us to access that data, you know, help us to help these organisms. So tapconnection.org, we're in the process of creating a new website. It's not quite done yet. We're a small organization, but it's almost done. And in the meantime, you can look at the old one to learn a little more about what we do. And I think that's it. So let me see if I can get out of here.
Thanks, Jane and Bruce. We are at 3 o'clock. I think we have one question that came in, so we'll take the one question for you, Jane, and then if anybody else has questions, I'll leave the Q&A open for a minute or two, and we can address them after the webinar by email. So Jane, the question for you is, how will you monitor monarch butterfly response to these plantings? Okay, so that's an interesting question. I get this quite a bit from certain audiences. So monitoring is an important part of the process, and it's not our primary focus. There are a lot of other organizations that are doing that. So my goal, first of all, and we are working obviously with very good scientists who are advising us every step of the way on best practices. We're not citizen scientists. We're not just people running willy-nilly around doing these things. We are working with best scientific advisors. That being said, our goal is plants in the ground. And that is our focus. We are boots in the ground, getting plants in the ground. There's a lot of people that are working, all of our informal monitoring we've done to date, because we do some of it, has shown that all of the areas are being very, very well used. Restoring habitat in Oklahoma, Bruce will probably concur with this. It's so desperately, desperately needs to be done. Our habitat here is so badly degraded that, you know, anything that we can do just to make progress has, I think, is going to help. So it's not a great answer, but it's kind of where we are. It's just our resources are too limited to focus, have that be our primary focuses. We're all about plants in the ground and working with the scientists as our advisors. Thank you. Darren, I don't have a specific question for you, but if there's anything else you wanted to add before we sign off, go ahead.
No, I'm good. Thanks, Allison. Thanks for the opportunity. This was a good session. Okay, great. Well, thanks to all the speakers, and thanks everyone who joined us today. Next week is the KBA session, so make sure to register for that. And with that, thanks everyone. Bye-bye. Okay, thank you.